The garden gate hangs off its hinge, wrenched from stone by something faster than the wind that follows it, and Henry Singh stands in the wreckage of 3 centuries of discipline with rain running down a face that has not aged since 1711. Milo's scream still rings in his ears, cut short the instant his hand closed the distance between the boy and the thing that came over the wall. His knuckles are wrong. Not human wrong. He does not bother to hide it anymore. And Eva Pedersen stands 4 feet away in a ruined cardigan with her son crushed against her hip, staring at the hand that just saved her child, and the face that has stopped pretending to be ordinary. He waits for her to run. 315 years of solitude have taught him exactly how this goes. The scream, the retreat, a door bolted against him before dawn. He has built an entire life around needing no one to stay. Her voice, when it comes, is not the one he braced for. Is that all you've got? Not a question. A dare, thrown past his shoulder at the dark, her arms tightening around Milo instead of pulling him toward the house, toward safety, away from the thing she has just watched him become. Something in Henry's chest that has been sealed since a century before her grandmother was born comes open like a door he forgot he'd nailed shut. He has ruled for 3 lifetimes. He has never once been anyone's weakness. He is now. 6 weeks earlier, Aldermere still believes Ashwick Hall belongs to an old family that keeps to itself, and Eva Pedersen believes she is only there for an interview she cannot afford to fail. The taxi drops her at iron gates thick with ivy, at the end of a gravel drive so long the meter would have doubled if she'd let it run, and she walks the last quarter mile in the one blazer she owns without a coffee stain, rehearsing a resume that leaves out exactly why she no longer works for the Ravenscourt family 3 towns over. Not fired. Let go, the letter called it. Restructuring. Though everyone in Aldermere's tight service circuit knows restructuring is what happens after a company called Ashwick Holdings buys the debt on a family estate and decides the household staff is redundant. She has spent 6 weeks trying not to hate a name she'd never heard a voice attached to. Now she's walking up its driveway with her son's daycare schedule folded in her bag like a confession. Marcus Rail meets her at the door before she can find a bell to ring, silver-haired and precise in a way that makes her feel, for one unkind second, like she's tracked something onto the marble. Her name is already settled in his mouth before she's offered it, pronounced once, decisively, like he's already decided something about her and chosen not to share it yet. Mrs. Pedersen. A small exact bow of the head. Mr. Singh is finishing a call. You'll wait in the east room. The correction is out of her mouth before she can stop it. It's Ms. Something flickers at the corner of his mouth that isn't quite a smile. Of course. The east room turns out to be larger than her entire apartment. Dark wood and cold fireplace, and a wall of windows looking out onto a garden gone slightly wild at the edges, hedges grown past their intended shapes, roses climbing a trellis nobody has trained in years. She has time to catalog 4 unlabeled portraits, all of them men with the same faint architecture of cheekbone, before the door opens behind her. She has built an image in her head over 6 weeks of blank rage. Someone soft-handed and sharp-suited, the kind of man who fires 200 people over video call and calls it a restructuring. The man who walks in wears no suit at all. Henry Singh is in a plain dark sweater with the sleeves pushed to his forearms, hair white and long enough to be pulled back at his neck, and he moves like the room is slightly too small for him, like stillness costs him something. She clocks him as not soft-handed immediately, the way her body clocks threat before her mind finishes the thought. Ms. Pedersen. Correct, on the first try, and she hates that she notices. Thank you for coming all this way. You made the offer conditional on an in-person interview. I didn't have a lot of choice in the way. Something moves behind his eyes. Not offense, closer to interest. The way a man looks at a locked door he's curious about rather than annoyed by. No, you didn't. He shows no interest in her previous employer, doesn't glance at the resume she brought, though she is fairly sure he has already read it twice. He wants to know about Milo's school hours, what she does when her son is sick, and she has nowhere to be but work. He presses, with a directness that catches her off guard, into what happened at Ravenscourt. And when she tells him, flat, factual, refusing to let her voice do anything humiliating. A long silence follows, then a quiet acknowledgement that the acquisition cost her a job she liked. Specific enough to mean he actually read the file. You bought the debt. Your company did. That's not exactly an apology-shaped fact. No, it isn't. He does not defend it, does not explain it either, and the refusal unsettles her more than an excuse would have. By the time Rayleigh walks her back to the gate, she's been offered a salary large enough to make her hands shake around the contract, live-in quarters in the carriage house, and a start date 11 days out. She has also, without meaning to, told a stranger more about her son than most of her co-workers in 3 years. She takes the job because the number on the page means she can stop doing the math every night that tells her how many weeks of daycare she can afford before something breaks. She does not tell herself she took it because of the way he'd wanted to know about Milo, like the answer mattered. She is careful not to look at that thought directly, because looking too long at anything about Henry Singh feels, from the very first day, like a mistake she is choosing with her eyes open. The carriage house is small, and hers, which after 4 years of a shared apartment feels like a kind of wealth no salary line could capture. Milo claims the window seat as his own kingdom within an hour, presses his whole face to the glass to watch the hedges, wants confirmation 9 times in the first week on whether the man who owns the big house is a king. He's just a person, baby, she tells him, and mostly believes it. Mostly manages not to think about hands that moved a delivery crate off a loading dock in one motion that should have taken 2 men. The trouble starts on a Tuesday, with a notice from Milo's daycare about a staff training day, buried in an email she skims at 6 a.m. between making his lunch and finding his other shoe. Priya, her one actual friend, left standing after the move, is 3 hours away and unreachable before 9. There is no backup plan, and Eva has neither a second income nor a village, only a 5-year-old, a job she's had for 9 days, and a 9 a.m. meeting with Rayleigh about the household accounts she cannot miss. So she does the thing she swore in the interview she would never do. She brings Milo to work. Her plan involves the small reading nook off the kitchen pantry, a stack of smuggled picture books, strict instructions about staying put, and a prayer that the meeting runs 40 minutes and not an hour. It survives exactly 11 minutes, roughly how long it takes a 5-year-old with a full tank of curiosity to discover that the pantry door leads to a hallway, and the hallway to a garden door left ajar by a groundskeeper already gone home. Eva finds this out the way most disasters announce themselves, by their sudden total silence. She excuses herself from the meeting under a half-formed lie about the restroom, checks the nook, finds 2 abandoned picture books and no boy, and spends 90 of the worst seconds of her adult life understanding that she is about to be fired for the crime of loving her son enough to have brought him at all. She finds him in the garden. The light is doing the thing early evening light does in late summer, gold and thick as syrup through the hedges. Cicadas going somewhere in the high grass, and Henry Singh is kneeling in the dirt in his good trousers with Milo at his shoulder, both of them tipped back to look at nothing Eva can immediately identify, until she follows the line of his arm and sees he is tracing something in the air. Not pointing, tracing. The way you'd draw a shape for someone who can't yet see it. And Milo is nodding along with the seriousness of a boy let in on a secret too large for most adults. That one there. Low, unhurried, a finger following an invisible line. The 3 in a row. The old sailors called that his belt. Before there were maps, men crossed entire oceans following that belt home. Like a compass? Milo, breathless with the discovery. Better. A compass can be wrong. That has been exactly where it is for longer than anyone alive has existed. Longer than you? A pause that Eva, frozen at the edge of the hedge with her heart trying to climb out through her throat, cannot read from this distance. Even longer than me. Something in his voice, when it comes, is careful in a way that has nothing to do with astronomy. She should announce herself, Every second unseen is a second closer to whatever consequence is coming for smuggling her son into a stranger's garden during a meeting about his own household's finances. But her feet have gone traitor, rooted in the grass, because the man kneeling in the dirt teaching her son to find a belt of stars looks nothing like the man who bought the debt on a family estate and called 200 people redundant. He looks like someone who has done this before, or wanted to for a long time and never had the excuse. It's Milo who breaks the spell, catching sight of her over Henry's shoulder and lighting up the way he only does when he has news too big to hold. "Mom! Mom! He knows the stars! All of them!" Henry rises in one motion, too smooth for a man his apparent age to make from a kneel, and for one unguarded second before his face resets into something more composed, Eva catches an expression she can't file anywhere. Not annoyance, not the mild professional patience she'd braced for, closer to a man caught doing something he never expected anyone to see. "I'm so sorry." The words come out of her in a rush, all the careful competence she brought to the interview replaced by something closer to panic. "He wasn't supposed to. I had a meeting, and the daycare called this morning, and I didn't have anyone. And I know that's not. I know I should have told Mr. Rail. I should have asked. I'll have him packed up in 2 minutes. I'm so sorry, Ms. Pedersen." The same precision as the interview, like the correction matters to him. He is not a liability. He is a 5-year-old who wandered into a garden. I am fairly certain that's within his job description. He doesn't have a job description. He's 5. Exactly my point. The dryness of it, so entirely without the warmth his face had a moment ago with Milo, makes it take her a second to register as a joke at all, and when she does, something in her chest does an unwilling, traitorous thing that feels dangerously close to laughing. Did you just make a joke? I have been known to, on occasion, across several centuries. A beat, and then, almost formal, like he's issuing a decree. Rarely on Tuesdays. That's not a real rule. It is now. I've just made it. Milo, entirely uninterested in the adults negotiating something he doesn't have the vocabulary for yet, tugs at Henry's sleeve. "Can you show me the one that looks like a spoon?" The plow. Yes. A glance toward Eva. A question, not a command, waiting on her the way he waited on her answers in the interview, like her permission is a real variable in the equation and not a formality he's working around. "If your mother allows it. 5 more minutes. I imagine Mr. Rayleigh can survive a short delay to the accounts." She should say no, should scoop Milo up, apologize her way back inside, salvage whatever's left of her professionalism before her employer of 9 days decides she's more trouble than the salary is worth. Instead, she watches her son's face, lit gold in the last of the light, looking at a man who 3 minutes ago she'd have sworn had no interest in anything that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet, and something in her own carefully maintained anger. 6 weeks of it, built brick by brick since the Ravenscourt letter, shifts an inch to the side, just enough to let something else in. 5 minutes. It becomes closer to 20. She stays at the edge of the garden the whole time, arms crossed, telling herself she's supervising, while Henry kneels back down in the dirt and points out a dipper, a belt, a bear that Milo insists on calling a dog, and does not correct him. The willingness to let a 5-year-old be wrong about a bear, if being wrong makes him happy, undoes a knot in Eva's chest she didn't know she'd been carrying since the Ravenscourt letter came. She still doesn't trust him, she tells herself. On the walk back with Milo's hand in hers, and his voice going a mile a minute about spoons and belts and dogs made of stars. She doesn't trust a man who can buy a family's debt without blinking, doesn't trust the way the staff goes still when he enters a room, doesn't trust those 4 unlabeled portraits with their matching cheekbones and no dates beneath the frames. But that night, tucking Milo in, half asleep already, he wants to know whether Henry will show him more stars tomorrow. And Eva finds herself answering maybe, and meaning it, and lying awake afterward turning that maybe over like a stone with something sharp underneath it. Because 6 weeks ago, She'd have sworn Henry Singh was a man incapable of kneeling in the dirt for anyone. And tonight she watched him do it for 45 straight minutes without once checking his own hands for dirt. The days after settle into something she doesn't examine too closely. Star charts taped crooked to the carriage house wall, a book on constellations on the kitchen table with no note attached. Milo repeats a fact about tomatoes being technically a fruit to 3 separate staff members, with the fervor of a boy let in on a great secret. And each time, something unguarded crosses Henry's face when he overhears it. She still raises it with Rayleigh, carefully, whether she should be keeping Milo further from Henry's time, and Rayleigh looks at her for a long moment, before offering only that Mr. Singh has not shown a 5-year-old the stars in longer than she would believe. She doesn't press him on what he means by that. She isn't sure she wants the answer yet, not while the version of Henry Singh in her head, dirt on his knees, patient about wrong bears, willing to be teased about Tuesdays, is easier to live next door to than whatever's underneath those 4 unlabeled portraits. 2 nights later, she wakes to the housekeeper's voice at her door, low and urgent. An incident near the east wall, and Mr. Singh has left instructions that she keep Milo inside until further notice. And something in the woman's face, careful and blank, tells Eva that whatever happened at that wall is not the kind of thing anyone intends to explain to the new hire. No one tells Eva the incident at the east wall was anything but a fox in the hedges that spooked the groundskeeper into calling it something worse. No one tells her anything at all, which she has started to understand is its own kind of answer at Ashwick Hall. The staff's particular silence, practiced and complete. The way Rayleigh's face goes smooth as a coin whenever she raises a question with a real edge to it. She stops pushing. She tells herself it's because Milo doesn't need his mother chasing ghosts through a house that pays better than anywhere she's worked in a decade. And mostly, in the daylight, she believes it. The nights are harder to manage than the daylight. It's Milo who breaks the routine first, the way Milo breaks most things. Not maliciously, just by being 5 and hungry and unwilling to wait for anyone's schedule. He wants pancakes at 7 in the evening, a full hour before dinner, and when Eva explains that pancakes are a breakfast food in most households, he counters with the kind of unimpeachable 5-year-old logic that has never once lost an argument. Eggs are breakfast, and eggs are also dinner sometimes, so the rule is already broken, so pancakes should be allowed too. She is standing in the main kitchen at 7:30, flour on her wrist, and Milo perched on a stool, narrating his own opinions about batter consistency, when Henry appears in the doorway, with the particular hesitation of a man crossing into territory he doesn't have a map for. "I understand there has been a ruling in favor of pancakes." Milo's legal team was very persuasive. "I'd like to submit an amicus brief." A beat, and then, with the gravity of a man discussing treaty negotiations, "I have never made a pancake. In 315 years? Butter did not always exist in the form it does now. Neither, I might add, did the electric griddle." The dryness of it takes her a second, the way most of his jokes do, delivered flat enough that she's never fully sure until the second beat whether he's teasing her or simply reporting facts about the historical record of dairy. And by then Milo has already thrust the whisk into Henry's hand, with the absolute confidence of a boy who has never once doubted an adult could master anything if properly supervised by him. What follows is 20 minutes of a 300-year-old vampire ruining batter with the same careful precision he probably once brought to correspondence and swordplay, following Milo's shouted instructions with a seriousness that has no business being as endearing as it is. And Eva stands at the stove trying to flip pancakes, and not watch too closely, and failing at both. The first batch is inedible. Henry regards the charred evidence with the expression of a general reviewing a lost campaign. The second batch, made after he stops trying to fold the batter like it owes him something and simply follows Milo's instructions, comes out almost right, and Milo declares it the best pancake in the history of pancakes with a 5-year-old's total disregard for hyperbole, and eats 3 of them standing at the counter in his socks, while Henry watches him with an expression Eva has started to catalog without meaning to. Something unguarded, something that looks less like a man being polite to his housekeeper's son, and more like a man relearning a language he thought he'd buried. This becomes the shape of the next 2 weeks. Not every night, Some nights Henry disappears entirely, gone before dusk on business. Rayleigh describes in terms so vague they might as well be fog, but often enough that Milo starts setting 3 places at the small kitchen table without instruction. Often enough that Eva stops making excuses to herself about supervision and starts simply sitting down. Henry reads to Milo twice. Both times a story he tells rather than reads from any book. Something about a fisherman and a star that fell into the sea and had to be walked home across 100 miles of coastline by a boy no older than Milo, told in a voice pitched low and unhurried that has Milo asleep before the star makes it halfway home. Eva sits in the doorway of Milo's room both times and doesn't interrupt, and doesn't examine too closely what it does to her chest to watch a man who buys and dismantles companies for a living tuck a blanket around her son's shoulders with the exact same care he uses handling something breakable and irreplaceable. One Saturday, Milo decides Henry needs instruction in modern greetings, a project he undertakes with the seriousness of a diplomat opening formal negotiations. He explains the fist bump 3 separate times, slowly, the way you'd explain something to someone who might genuinely be from another century. Which, Eva thinks, watching from the porch steps with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands. He technically is. Henry's first attempt lands with the timing of a man translating from a language with no equivalent concept, his fist arriving a full second after Milo's has already opened into the little explosion Milo insists is mandatory. And Milo's despair is so total and so genuine that Henry actually apologizes, gravely, formally, as though he's failed a proper diploma exam rather than a 5-year-old's handshake. It takes 4 more attempts before he gets the timing right, and when he finally does, when the fist bump lands and the explosion happens on cue, and Milo whoops with the triumph of a teacher whose slowest student has finally graduated, Henry's face does something Eva hasn't seen it do before. An actual, unguarded smile, unpracticed, like a muscle remembering a shape it hasn't used in longer than she wants to think about. There is a version of me, this at one point that afternoon, watching Milo run laps around the vegetable beds for no reason either adult can determine, that would have found this entire exchange beneath his dignity. What changed? He doesn't answer immediately, and when he does, it isn't really an answer at all. Just a long look at the boy circling the tomatoes with his arms out like an airplane, and something in his face that Eva is starting to recognize as the particular quiet of a man doing careful math with numbers he doesn't want her to see. She finds herself, more than once in those 2 weeks, forgetting entirely why she came to Ashwick Hall, hating the name on her contract. It surfaces sometimes, a stray thought about the Ravenscourt letter, a glimpse of Ashwick Holdings' letterhead on a document Rayleigh leaves on the kitchen counter. And each time it startles her a little, the way a chord out of key startles you in a song you'd stopped paying attention to. Because the version of Henry Singh doing math with tomato plants and losing fist bump negotiations to a 5-year-old does not fit anywhere beside the version of him that bought a family's debt without blinking. She has started to suspect these are not, in fact, 2 different men. She has started to suspect that's exactly the problem. The nightmare happens on a Thursday, 3 weeks into the arrangement. Milo wakes screaming about nothing he can articulate afterward, the kind of pure animal fear that comes from nowhere and means nothing except that it's real to him. And Eva is halfway down the hall before she's fully awake, and Henry is already there, already kneeling by the small bed, his mouth already moving around something too low for her to catch from the doorway. And by the time she reaches them, Milo has both arms locked around his neck and is breathing in the shuddering aftermath of a storm passing. And Henry has gone entirely silent again, just kneeling there with his hand flat and still against the boy's back, absorbing it, the way you'd absorb weather. I've got him. The words barely there at all, his mouth moving around something that isn't quite English, isn't quite anything from this century, low and old, more a vibration she feels in the doorway than hears, and Milo's breathing slows anyway, matched to a rhythm neither of them can name. She doesn't push for what language that was. She folds it, silently, into the growing list of things she has decided not to raise. A list that has gotten uncomfortably long for a woman who used to pride herself on pushing every question that mattered. It's 2 nights after the nightmare that she finds the wing. She isn't looking for it. She's looking for Milo's missing shoe, the left one, mysteriously absent from the pile by the carriage house door, and some instinct sends her back through the main house after hours, past the kitchen, down a corridor she's walked a dozen times without noticing the narrower hallway branching off it, half hidden behind a tapestry that has clearly been arranged to hang exactly where it hangs. The door at the end of that hallway is unlocked. Not open, but unlocked. The kind of oversight that happens to even careful households on ordinary Tuesdays. And Eva stands in front of it for a full minute, telling herself to turn around before her hand is already on the handle, before the door is already swinging inward on hinges too well-oiled for a room this obviously unused. The room is a gallery. Portraits, a dozen of them at least, floor to ceiling on both long walls, and her breath goes short before her mind catches up to why. Because every single face in every single portrait is the same face, unmistakably, unarguably Henry's, dressed in doublets and frock coats and high collars that belong to centuries she can only guess at, painted by hands that clearly worked decades apart from each other and somehow kept painting the same 30-year-old man with the same white hair and the same stillness behind the eyes. She moves down the wall like she's walking through evidence at a crime scene, which some cold, clear part of her recognizes is exactly what this is. The dates are worked into the frames in small brass plaques, most of them tarnished past reading, but the nearest one is clean enough to make out 1711, beneath a portrait of a much younger-looking version of the same face, dressed plainer than the others, painted with none of the polish of the later works, like the artist was working from memory of a man who'd only recently stopped needing to eat. Beside that portrait, in a glass case she almost misses in the dim light, sits a single object that has nothing to do with paintings at all. A small leather shoe, child-sized, cracked with age but clearly preserved, deliberately, carefully, the way you preserve something you can't bear to keep looking at, and can't bear to put away either. There's no plaque beneath it. There doesn't need to be. Eva has spent 3 weeks watching a man kneel in gardens and ruin pancakes and hum something in a dead language until a screaming child went quiet in his arms. And she understands, standing in front of that shoe with her own son's missing sneaker forgotten entirely in her hand, that she is looking at the reason for all of it. You shouldn't be in here. She turns too fast, her heart already climbing into her throat before she's fully registered the voice. And Henry is standing in the doorway with an expression she has never once seen on him in 3 weeks of pancakes and bedtime stories. Not anger, not even close to anger. Something closer to a wound reopening in real time. Something that makes him look, for the first time since she met him, every one of his 315 years. I was looking for Milo's shoe, and the door was open, and I didn't mean to. I know. Quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that costs a person something to produce. His eyes go to the case beside her, to the small, cracked leather shoe sitting in its glass, and something moves through his face that she doesn't have a name for, and suspects she isn't meant to. Whose was it? He doesn't answer. He crosses the room instead, slow, careful, the way he crosses every room in this house like the air in it might break, and stops beside her in front of the case, close enough that she can feel the cold coming off him the way you feel cold coming off a window in winter, and for a long moment neither of them speaks at all, the two of them just standing there in a room full of his own face across 3 centuries, looking at a shoe that has clearly outlasted whoever it belonged to by longer than Eva has been alive. Not tonight. Final, and it isn't a refusal, not quite. Something closer to a man reaching for one more day before he has to hand her the worst thing he owns. Formal returns overnight, the way weather turns overnight, and Eva learns within a single day that she'd gotten used to a version of Henry Singh that apparently only existed on loan. He is not unkind about it. That's what makes it worse. He is precise, correct, unfailingly polite in the exact register he used across the desk at her interview 6 weeks ago, addressing her as Ms. Pedersen, with a formality that now lands like a slap dressed up as courtesy. He stops appearing in the kitchen. He stops appearing anywhere Eva or Milo might reasonably be, in fact, with a thoroughness that would almost be impressive if it weren't so obviously deliberate. Meals sent up by staff, instructions relayed through Rayla, the particular silence of a man who has decided the safest thing he can do for everyone involved is disappear into the parts of the house she has no reason to enter. She tells herself she doesn't care. She tells herself this while reorganizing the pantry for the third time in 2 days, while finding excuses to walk the long way around the main house instead of past the east wing, while lying awake running the conversation in the gallery, back through her head and landing, every time, on the same useless conclusion. She saw something she wasn't meant to see, and now she is being quietly, correctly, unbearably punished for it. The second day is worse than the first, mostly because by the second day, the novelty of being wounded has worn off, and what's left underneath it is something closer to grief, which strikes her as an absurd thing to feel about a man she's known for 6 weeks, and which she resents feeling anyway. She catches herself, twice, standing at the kitchen window at the hour Henry usually appears, waiting for a shape in the doorway that doesn't come. And both times she makes herself walk away before she can name what she's doing as waiting. By the third day, Rael has started delivering messages with the particular gentleness of a man managing 2 people he genuinely likes and cannot, professionally, say so to either of them. Mr. Singh sends his regrets. Mr. Singh has asked that the household proceed as usual. Mr. Singh will not be joining for dinner. Eva starts to recognize the shape of it. Not cruelty, never cruelty. Just a very old, very practiced kind of retreat. A man closing every door he can reach because he doesn't trust himself not to open all of them at once. Milo notices before she manages to say a word about it. Milo notices everything, these days, in the specific radar of a child who has learned that adults' silences carry more information than their sentences. Is Henry mad at me? No, baby. He's not mad at you. Is he mad at you? She doesn't have a good answer for that one, and the pause before she manufactures something reassuring is exactly long enough for a 5-year-old to file it away as evidence. By the 4th day, Eva has drafted, in her head, 3 different versions of the conversation where she tells Rayleigh she needs to discuss ending the arrangement early, not resigning outright. She's careful with herself about the distinction, just raising the possibility, testing the shape of the words before she has to say them somewhere they'd count. She hates that it's come to this. She hates more that some small, humiliating part of her isn't thinking about the salary or the carriage house, or the math she used to do every night about daycare. She's thinking about a man kneeling in a garden teaching her son to find a belt of stars, and how much it costs her now, to imagine simply not seeing that again. It's Milo who ends it, the way Milo ends most standoffs, by refusing to accept that adults get to have problems too complicated for a 5-year-old to fix. He goes looking for Henry on the 5th morning, while Eva is on the phone with Priya in the carriage house kitchen, half listening to advice about job postings she isn't ready to look at yet, and by the time she notices he's gone, it's been 11 minutes. And 11 minutes is exactly long enough, she's learned, for something to have already happened. She finds him in Henry's office, which she has never once entered in 6 weeks of working at Ashwick Hall, standing in the doorway of a room built for a much larger and colder version of Henry Singh than the one she spent 2 weeks getting used to. Dark wood, a desk the size of her old apartment's kitchen table, walls of books that look old enough to have opinions about the printing press. Milo is standing directly in front of that desk with his arms crossed and his chin up, radiating the particular fury of a small child who has decided, unilaterally, to fix something. Henry, behind the desk, looks like a man who has been ambushed by a tribunal he has no defense prepared for. Milo, you have to say sorry to my mom. He doesn't move from in front of the desk, chin still up, entirely undeterred by 315 years of accumulated authority radiating off the man behind it. You've been mean. Not regular mean. Quiet mean. That's worse. Milo's voice wobbles slightly on the last word, the fury cracking just enough to show what's underneath it, which isn't fury at all. You said you'd show me the one that looks like a crown. You promised on Tuesday, and now you won't even come to dinner. Milo, There are things happening that aren't about me. I know. Grown-up things. The last two words come out with the withering contempt of a boy who has heard that exact phrase used to dismiss him one too many times. But Mom's sad, and you're the reason, and that's not fair, because she didn't do anything. I checked. I asked her 3 times if she did something wrong, and she said no, and Mom doesn't lie to me, so it has to be your fault. The logic is airtight in the way only a 5-year-old's logic can be airtight, built entirely on premises no adult would ever state that plainly out loud, and Eva watches something in Henry's face buckle slightly under the weight of hearing it laid out with that much clarity. Eva stops in the doorway, one hand still braced against the frame, caught somewhere between mortification and something that feels dangerously close to gratitude for her son's complete inability to read a room. Henry's eyes find hers over Milo's head, and for the first time in 5 days, something in his face isn't formal at all. Something raw and exhausted, and entirely without armor. A man who has spent 5 days building a wall and just watched a 5-year-old walk straight through it without noticing it was there. Milo. Careful. Quiet. None of the office's coldness left in it. Your mother and I have some things to discuss that aren't really about the crown-shaped stars. Is it about the room with all the paintings? The silence that follows has a different texture than the office's silence a moment ago. Sharper, more exposed. Eva's breath catching somewhere she doesn't examine and Henry's whole body going very, very still. Milo told me about it. Quiet. Before either of them can spiral into whatever version of this conversation they're each bracing for. He found the door unlocked a few days before I did. He didn't understand what he was looking at. I didn't correct him. Something loosens fractionally in Henry's shoulders, the particular relief of a man who realizes the wound isn't as deep as he'd braced for. I'm hungry, Milo announces, with the timing of a diplomat who has accomplished his objective and is now interested exclusively in snacks. Can we have the pancakes again? It isn't really a question, not the way Milo poses it, and neither adult in the room has the will left to treat it as one. They end up in the kitchen an hour later, the same kitchen, the same stools, Milo narrating opinions about batter consistency with the same absolute confidence as 3 weeks ago. And it would almost be exactly the same evening if Henry weren't so visibly careful with every movement, like a man handling something he's afraid of dropping twice. I owe you an apology. This, once Milo has been sufficiently distracted by his own culinary genius to stop supervising the adults. Not for the wing. For the 5 days after it. I've had a great deal of practice disappearing when something frightens me, and considerably less practice staying. What frightened you? He doesn't answer immediately. He watches Milo mix batter with the wrong end of the spoon and correct himself before either adult can point it out. And something in his face when he finally speaks is quieter than anything she's heard from him yet. You looking at that shoe and understanding, correctly, that I have already lost this particular kind of happiness once. I found it considerably easier to be formal with you than to watch you decide I'm not worth the risk of losing it again. I haven't decided anything. No. A pause, careful, like he's setting something down that might break. But you could. You'd be entitled to. I bought the debt on the last place that made you feel safe, and I own the ground your son is currently standing on, and everything I am is built on centuries you have absolutely no reason to trust. I'm still here. Yes. Something moves through his face that isn't quite a smile and isn't quite its opposite either. Something more fragile than either. A man doing careful arithmetic with a number he still can't quite believe. You are. I've been trying to work out why for 5 days, and I haven't managed a satisfying answer. Maybe you should ask instead of doing math. The corner of his mouth does something unpracticed. That would require admitting I don't already know the answer. Welcome to being a person. The dryness of it takes him a beat, the same delayed recognition she started to expect from him. And when it lands, Something that might genuinely be a laugh moves through his chest. Brief, almost startled, like he's caught himself doing something he hasn't done in longer than either of them wants to calculate. Milo, oblivious to the entire undercurrent, holds up a spatula with a piece of pancake stuck to it like a flag. This one's shaped like Florida. It is remarkably not shaped like Florida. Something in the exchange, the three of them, the kitchen, the ordinary ridiculous argument about geography and breakfast food, feels less like a truce and more like something has actually, quietly, been decided. Eva doesn't press him to explain the shoe that night. She's learned enough these 6 weeks to know the difference between a door left open by accident and one someone hands you the key to on purpose, and she'd rather wait for the second kind. But later, after Milo is finally asleep and she's walking the long path back to the carriage house under a sky gone properly dark, she finds Henry waiting by the garden gate. The same gate, she realizes with a small, cold jolt, that will one day hang broken off its hinge in a version of this story neither of them has lived yet. There's someone coming to the house tomorrow. Whatever eased in him over pancakes has tightened again. Carefully, deliberately. Someone from a long time ago. I'd ask you to let Rayleigh know if you see anyone at the gates who isn't staff. Should I be worried? He doesn't answer right away, and the not answering is its own kind of answer, the way it always is with him. The cold coming off him in the dark feels different tonight, sharper, more deliberate, less like the ordinary stillness she's grown used to, and more like a man bracing for weather he can already smell coming. I'd like you to be careful. Final. There's a difference. That's not an answer either. No. Something moves behind his eyes, brief and old, gone again before she can name it. It isn't. He doesn't explain further, and she doesn't push, standing there in the dark with the gate cool under her hand and a man beside her who has just spent 5 days proving exactly how far he'll go to protect the people in this house from things he refuses to name out loud. Whatever's coming tomorrow, she understands, without being told, that it is not a fox in the hedges. And for the first time since she found that small cracked shoe in its glass case, she isn't sure whether the thing she's more afraid of is what's coming through the gate, or how much she's already decided to stand her ground beside him when it does. Morning arrives ordinary and golden, the kind of late summer morning that makes the previous 5 days feel like weather that's already passed through and moved on, and Eva finds Henry waiting for her at the kitchen door before Milo has finished his cereal, dressed plainer than she's ever seen him, sleeves already pushed up like a man bracing for physical work rather than conversation. I'd like to show you something, if you're willing. Milo, Rayleigh has agreed to referee a lengthy negotiation about tomato harvesting in the garden. I'm told it will take at least an hour. Something almost sheepish crosses his face, quickly smoothed over. I asked him yesterday. I wanted to be sure I'd actually go through with this before I promised you I would. The walk to the locked wing feels entirely different in daylight. The corridor shorter than it seemed at night, the tapestry hanging exactly where it's always hung, no longer sinister so much as simply old. A piece of fabric that has watched this door for longer than anyone currently alive has existed. Henry doesn't hesitate at the threshold this time. He opens it himself, steps through first, and holds it for her the way you'd hold a door for someone you're inviting, rather than someone who's trespassed. In daylight, the gallery is smaller than she remembered. Not smaller in size exactly, but smaller in menace. The portraits catching real sun through a high clear-story window she hadn't noticed in the dark. Dust motes hanging gold in the light the way they do in old churches. Henry crosses to the case with the small cracked shoe and stands in front of it with his hands loosely folded, the posture of a man visiting a grave he's visited 1,000 times and never once gotten used to. His name was Edwin. Eva doesn't say anything. She's learned, these 6 weeks, that the useful thing to do when Henry Singh starts a sentence like that is to let the silence hold the space open, rather than fill it. I was born in a village outside Amritsar, in a life I've told almost no one about, because there's almost no one left who would recognize the world I'm describing. My father traded in indigo and later in cloth, and when I was a young man, he sent me to manage accounts for a merchant house that did business with the English colonies. I met Constance there, in Bengal initially, and then again, by an accident I've never stopped being grateful for, in Virginia, where her father had taken the family after a scandal neither of them ever fully explained to me. We married in 1704. Edwin was born the following spring. He touches the edge of the glass case, not quite the shoe itself, just the cold surface protecting it. I was, by every account anyone who knew me then would give you, an ordinary man building an ordinary life in a world that made very little room for a man who looked like me building anything at all. I didn't mind. I had a wife who thought the world's opinion of us was beneath discussing, and a son who believed, with total conviction, that I personally arranged for the stars to come out every evening because he liked them. I had, for 6 years, everything I understand now to have been the entire allotment of happiness most people are given across an entire lifetime. What happened? Fever, the kind that moved through households in a single season, and took whichever child in the house had the weakest lungs, which in our house was Edwin, who'd had a difficult chest since infancy. Constance and I sat with him for 11 days. I remember every hour of it with a clarity I've never been able to lose, no matter how many centuries I've tried putting between myself and it. His voice doesn't break exactly. It's too old and too practiced for that. But something in it goes very flat. The particular flatness of a man reciting facts he's recited to himself so many times, the words have worn smooth. He died on the 12th. Constance was already ill herself by then, though neither of us knew it yet. She followed him within the month. Eva finds she has crossed the room without deciding to, standing close enough now to see the shoe up close. Small, cracked, one lace still knotted the way a 6-year-old would knot it, badly, with the particular optimism of a child convinced he'd mastered something he hadn't quite mastered yet. She thinks of Milo's shoes, tangled in a pile by the carriage house door, laces he still can't quite manage himself, and something about the ordinariness of the comparison undoes her more than any of the centuries did. I'm so sorry. It sounds inadequate the moment it leaves her. 300 years too small for what he's just handed her, but there isn't a better sentence in any language she speaks. I can't imagine 11 days like that. I don't think I'd have survived it. I didn't, in the ways that matter. Whatever walked out of that house afterward wasn't the man who walked in. He turns the shoe slightly with one finger against the glass, not quite touching it. An old habit worn into a gesture that no longer requires the actual contact. I've had 3 centuries to reconstruct something that resembles a person since. I'm not certain I ever fully managed it, until recently. There was a man who came to the house during Constance's illness. A physician, or so I believed at the time. He wasn't. He watched me sit with a dying wife the way I'd sat with a dying son. And when it was over, when I had buried the only 2 people who had ever made this world feel like something worth staying in, he offered me a way to stop feeling any of it, ever again. I understand now that grief makes people extraordinarily easy to recruit. I didn't understand that then. I said yes before he'd finished the sentence. Who was he? A man who has gone by a great many names since, in a great many places. At the time he called himself Aldrich. I've heard him called other things by other people over the centuries, some of them polite, most of them not. What matters, for today's purposes, is that he made me exactly what he is, and he has never once let me forget the debt he considers still owed. Henry's jaw tightens fractionally, an old grief hardening briefly into something closer to anger. He believes, that turning a grieving widower into something that could never lose anyone again was a mercy. I've spent 3 centuries deciding, some days more successfully than others, that it wasn't. Eva doesn't push for more about Aldrich, where he is now, whether Henry has seen him since, what 3 centuries do to a debt like that. She's learned enough these 6 weeks to know Henry Singh answers questions in his own order, on his own timeline, and that pushing rarely gets her there faster. You wanted to stop feeling it. I wanted to stop feeling anything. He finally looks at her, and there's nothing formal left in his face at all. Nothing of the man who conducted her interview 6 weeks ago. It worked, for longer than I'm proud of. 315 years is a great deal of time to spend making very certain nothing gets close enough to lose again. I built an entire existence around it. The distance, the formality, the particular art of being present in a room without ever actually arriving in it. I was, by any reasonable measure, extremely good at not feeling anything for a very long time. And now, something moves through his face that she started to recognize as the specific expression he wears when he's doing careful arithmetic with a number that terrifies him. Now there is a 5-year-old who taught me the fist bump, and a woman who told me, quite bluntly, to try asking instead of doing math, and I find I have developed an alarming and entirely unwelcome capacity to feel things again. I would like to tell you I've made peace with that. I haven't. I spent 5 days trying to unmake it, and the only thing I accomplished was proving to a 5-year-old that I'm capable of being exactly as much of a coward as any ordinary man. You're not a coward. You told me all of this. I'm telling you because there's a man arriving today who already knows most of it, and I would rather you hear it from me, in a room I chose, on a morning I chose, than have him hand it to you as a weapon. Something hardens briefly behind his eyes, old and tired in a way that has nothing to do with grief, and everything to do with a much longer, much colder kind of vigilance. Adrian isn't from that night. He's from later, decades later. Long enough after Aldrich made me that I'd gone numb enough to do to someone else exactly what was done to me. I turned a man without his consent, believing at the time, as Aldrich once believed of me, that I was offering him a mercy. He didn't want it. He's never forgiven me, and I've spent a very long time agreeing with him that he shouldn't. Through the high window, faint and bright, comes the sound of Milo's laugh from the garden below, delighted about something entirely unrelated to centuries, or grief, or debts owed to strangers, and something in Henry's face eases at the sound of it despite everything he's just laid bare. The particular helpless softening of a man who has apparently decided, against every instinct 300 years old, that the sound is worth the risk. Thank you. Quiet. For choosing the room. Thank you. Just as quiet. For staying in it. Neither of them moves for a long moment, the two of them standing shoulder to shoulder in front of a small cracked shoe that has outlived everyone who ever knew the boy who wore it, and when Henry's hand finds hers, careful, a question posed in the small motion of his fingers rather than any words. She doesn't pull away, doesn't examine it, doesn't do anything except let it happen, the cold of his palm against her warm one feeling, for the first time since she arrived at Ashwick Hall, like something she's choosing rather than something happening to her. She thinks, standing there, of every version of Henry Singh she's assembled since the interview 6 weeks ago. The man who bought a family's debt without blinking. The man who ruined pancake batter with total gravity. The man who knelt in dirt teaching her son to find a belt of stars. The man who just described in a flat and terrible voice the exact hour he buried a wife and child 300 years before either of them were born. She'd built those into separate people once, filed them into categories that didn't have to touch each other. Standing in a room full of his own face across 3 centuries, his hand cold and steady in hers, she understands there was only ever the one man, all the way down, and that the coldness she'd clocked in him on the first day, the thing her body had flagged as threat before her mind could catch up, was never danger at all. It was grief, wearing the only shape it had left to wear after 300 years of practice. I don't know how to do this. The words arrive without sound again, the way they did the night of Milo's nightmare, something moving through the air between them that isn't quite speech and doesn't need to be. His thumb moves once, slow, against the back of her hand. I have not done this in longer than you would believe me if I told you the number. You don't have to know how. You just have to keep showing up. Something in his face does the unpracticed thing again, the smile that still looks like a muscle relearning its own shape, and for one suspended second, the locked wing feels less like a mausoleum and more like an ordinary room in an ordinary house. Sunlight through a high window, dust turning gold. Two people who have decided, independently and at the same time, to stop being careful. It's Rayleigh's voice from the corridor, careful and controlled in a way that immediately changes the temperature of the room. That ends it. A voice pitched for delivering news he clearly wishes he didn't have to deliver, and clearly practiced enough, after decades in this household, to deliver it anyway. Mr. Singh. He's early. Adrian Voss is not what Eva expected, which she understands. Standing in the entrance hall with her pulse doing something unhelpful in her throat is precisely the point of him. He is beautiful in the specific, unhurried way of a man who has had 300 years to perfect the art of being looked at. Tailored, unhurried, a dark coat that fits like it was poured onto him rather than sewn, and a smile that arrives a half second before it reaches his eyes, which never quite catch up to it at all. He bows over her hand instead of shaking it, an old-world gesture that would read as charming from anyone else, and reads, from him, like a man handling something he intends to appraise later. Miss Pedersen. Henry didn't mention his household had improved so significantly since the last time I visited. His gaze moves once, briefly, to Henry standing rigid by the fireplace, then returns to Eva with the particular attention of a man who has already decided she's the more interesting conversation in the room. He collects beautiful things and then forgets to mention them. It's one of his oldest habits. I'm not a thing he collects. I work here. Of course. The smile deepens, still not reaching his eyes. Forgive me. Semantics have never been my strength, 300 years notwithstanding, though I notice he hasn't corrected the characterization himself. Henry's jaw tightens, a muscle moving once beneath skin that hasn't aged since a century Eva can barely picture. Adrian. I'm merely making conversation, Henry. It's what civilized people do before the unpleasant part. Adrian settles into a chair he wasn't offered. Unhurried, proprietary, a man reclaiming territory rather than visiting it. Has he told you about Isolde yet? Or Marguerite? I only ask because he has a particular fondness for telling this part of the story once he's decided a woman is worth the effort of honesty. And I'd hate for you to be surprised by the pattern later, the way they were. He's told me about Constance and Edwin. Something flickers across Adrian's face. Not quite surprise. Closer to recalculation. A man adjusting for information he hadn't expected his opponent to already hold. Has he? That's new. He usually saves that particular grief for considerably later in the arrangement, if he offers it at all. His eyes cut to Henry, sharper now, something old and unresolved moving behind the charm. You must be special, Ms. Pedersen. Or he's grown careless in his old age. 315 years does strange things to a man's judgment. Say what you came to say, Adrian. I came to remind you what you are. Adrian rises from the chair in one motion, the charm dropping away like a coat shrugged off. And what's underneath it is colder, older, something that has been carrying a grievance so long it's calcified into architecture. You made me this, without asking. In a moment, you've spent 2 centuries apologizing for, and I've spent 2 centuries refusing to forgive. And now I find you playing house with a widow's son, teaching him to find constellations like, you didn't spend the last century telling me that attachment is a luxury creatures like us can't survive keeping. Which is it, Henry? Was I wrong to want out of what you gave me? Or are you wrong now, pretending this is anything but the same mistake with better lighting? This isn't the same. It's exactly the same. You take what isn't offered, because you've decided you know better than the person standing in front of you what mercy looks like. Adrian's gaze slides back to Eva, and for the first time the performance drops entirely, leaving something almost pleading underneath the ice. Ask him what happens to the ones who say no, Ms. Pedersen. Ask him what happened to me, the night I told him I didn't want what he was offering, And he gave it to me anyway because he'd already decided grief made the choice for both of us. That is not what happened, Adrian, and you know it. It's what happened to me. Whether it's what you meant to happen has never once been the point. Something almost like exhaustion moves across Adrian's face, 300 years of the same argument finally catching up with him mid-sentence. I didn't come here tonight to relitigate 1809. I came because I heard you'd found another woman willing to overlook what you are, and I wanted to see her face before you inevitably decide on her behalf what she's strong enough to survive. Eva doesn't look at Henry. She's watching Adrian instead, watching the old wound working itself loose in real time, and something in her, some instinct honed by 6 weeks of learning how to read the difference between a man's cruelty and a man's pain, recognizes this isn't really about her at all. I'm not asking him anything on your behalf. If you have something to settle with him, settle it. But I'm not a chess piece in whatever this is, and neither is my son. Your son. Something in Adrian's face sharpens at the word, interested in a way that makes the hair on Eva's arms rise before her mind catches up to why. Yes, I saw him in the garden on my way in. Charming boy, very trusting for a child living in a house full of secrets he hasn't been told yet. Stay away from him. I have no interest in your son, Ms. Pedersen. I have an interest in Henry finally understanding what it costs other people when he decides, unilaterally, what love requires of them. Adrian's coat settles as he turns for the door, unhurried again, the performance sliding back into place like a mask returning to its hook. I'll take my leave. I've said what I came to say. Whether he tells you the rest of it honestly is, as ever, entirely his choice to get wrong. The door closes behind him with a quiet, civilized click that somehow lands louder than a slam would have. The storm arrives faster than the forecast promised, rolling in off the ridge sometime after Milo's bedtime, with a suddenness that has Rayleigh checking the shutters, and Eva standing at the carriage house window, watching lightning stitch the tree line, while Henry paces the length of the great room, like a man bracing for a second visit he hasn't voiced aloud. She should feel safer with the door locked. She doesn't. The shape of the word son in Adrian's mouth earlier sits in her chest like a stone she can't put down. It's the silence from Milo's room that reaches her first. Not the ordinary silence of a sleeping child, but the wrong kind. The kind with a shape missing from it. And she's moving before she's finished the thought down the hall, into a room with an open window and rain blowing sideways through the curtains, and no boy in the bed at all. Her mind does the thing minds do in the worst 30 seconds of a person's life, cataloging everything at once and nothing usefully. The window latch broken from the outside, not the inside, a smear of mud on the sill too large to be a child's own boot. The star chart torn half off the wall like something brushed past it in a hurry. She is screaming Milo's name before she's fully out the door, screaming it into a storm loud enough to swallow the sound whole, and some ancient, unhelpful part of her brain keeps insisting this can't be real, keeps offering the possibility that he simply climbed out to look at the lightning, that there's a version of the next 60 seconds that ends in an ordinary scolding about staying in bed, and she holds on to that possibility with both hands, even as her feet carry her toward the main house at a dead run. She finds the garden door open when she reaches the main house. Henry already ahead of her, already running, already faster than anything human has a right to be across wet grass toward the sound that reaches her a half-second later. Milo's voice, high and frightened, coming from the direction of the east wall. The gate hangs off its hinge by the time she gets there, wrenched from stone by something with considerably more strength than wind. And Henry is between Milo and the dark with rain running down a face gone entirely unguarded, knuckles wrong in a way she has no name for and doesn't need one. Because whatever Adrian intended by coming over that wall, Henry has already closed the distance and made it impossible to finish. He waits, after, for her to run. She can see it in the set of his shoulders even from here. 300 years of certainty about exactly how this goes. The scream, the retreat, a door bolted against him before dawn. She doesn't run. She crosses the wrecked garden instead, pulls Milo against her hip, and looks past Henry's shoulder into the dark where Adrian stands at the tree line, bleeding from a wound already closing, watching the three of them with an expression that has finally, entirely, stopped pretending to be charming. "Is that all you've got?" It isn't a question. It's a dare. And something in Adrian's face, recognition maybe of a fight he's already lost regardless of tonight's outcome, makes him fade back into the storm without another word, gone the way old grievances go when they finally meet something they can't out-argue. Henry turns to her slowly, rain-soaked, undone, every one of his 315 years visible in a face that has stopped, for the first time she's ever seen, trying to hide anything at all. "You should be afraid of me. I've been afraid of a lot of things since I met you. That was never one of them." He looks at her like a man checking a fact he's rehearsed disbelieving for 3 centuries, searching her face for the flinch he's certain has to be coming, the recoil he's built his entire solitude around expecting. It doesn't come. She stands in the wreckage of the garden with her son's weight solid against her hip, and her heart still hammering from the run across wet grass. And whatever she's supposed to feel looking at the truth of him, fear, revulsion, the sensible retreat any reasonable person would make, simply refuses to arrive. Milo, shaking but already recovering with the resilience only children seem to have a full supply of, tips his face up toward Henry with an expression more curious than terrified. "You have claws now." "I do." "Cool." A beat, and then, with total 5-year-old sincerity, "Can you still do the fist bump?" Something breaks open in Henry's chest that Eva watches happen in real time. Not grief this time, not the old locked kind, but something warmer. Something that looks, for the first time in 3 centuries, like a man finally believing he's allowed to keep what he's found. He kneels in the mud without seeming to notice it, offers his fist with a solemnity that would be comic on any other night. And Milo bumps it with the full-body enthusiasm of a boy determined to prove that monsters and mornings can, in fact, coexist. Rayleigh finds them like that, a strange tableau in the ruined garden under a clearing sky. A boy laughing, a woman soaked to the skin and unafraid, and a man 300 years old kneeling in the dirt, with his true face finally, entirely, uncovered. 3 weeks later, under a sky gone properly clear for the first time since the storm, Eva stands in the same garden where all of this started, Milo asleep in the carriage house with Priya, who flew in the moment Eva called her and asked, without fully explaining why, whether she'd come stay a few days. "I want this." No hesitation in it at all. "Not because I'm afraid of losing you, because I've watched you carry 300 years alone, and I'd rather carry the next 300 beside you than spend the rest of my one lifetime wondering what it would have been like." Henry's hands are steady around hers, steadier than she's ever felt them. There's no undoing this once it starts. "I know. I'll ask you again in the morning, and the morning after that, as many mornings as it takes for you to be entirely certain. You can ask every morning for the rest of both our lives. The answer's going to keep being the same." He bends his head to hers under a sky finally full of stars. Neither of them needs a chart to find anymore. And the last thing Eva hears before the world tips sideways into something neither fully human nor entirely apart from it is Henry's voice. Low and steady and older than the ground beneath them both, promising her exactly what he once believed he'd never be allowed to promise anyone again. Forever, this time, chosen instead of stolen. Some loves arrive like weather, sudden and impossible to prepare for. Others are built slowly, pancake batter and star charts and a small unlocked door. Until one morning, you look up and realize the walls you spent a lifetime defending were never as important as the person patient enough to wait outside them. Henry Singh spent 3 centuries believing that wanting nothing was the only way to survive losing everything. It took a 5-year-old's fist bump and a woman who refused to run to prove him wrong. If this one found its way into your chest, tell us in the comments which moment undid you first. The pancakes, the constellations, or the storm. Hit like if you believe grief and love have always been running the same current underneath. And subscribe if you want to be here the next time a locked door opens and ask someone to walk through it.